The masquerade encounter. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to life-changing true stories, where reality meets emotion. And every story reminds us that even in heartbreak, destiny writes something more beautiful than we could ever imagine. Today's story begins beneath glittering chandeliers, among the whispers of power and wealth, and a woman who never expected her past to collide so dramatically with her present. The night shimmered with promise. Inside the grand Riverside Hotel, the ballroom glowed under hundreds of golden lights that reflected off crystal glasses, polished marble, and the delicate embroidery of designer gowns. Waiters moved like shadows between the guests, balancing trays of champagne as laughter rippled through the air. At the edge of the crowd stood Sophia Martinez, adjusting the strap of her emerald green evening gown. It had taken 2 months of saving to buy it, but tonight she wanted to look like she belonged. After all, this wasn't just another work function. This was the annual charity gala where the city's elite gathered to celebrate themselves beneath the banner of generosity. And beside her, calm and commanding in a tailored black tuxedo, stood her boss, Alexander Blackwood, the man every business magazine called a genius and every rival whispered about in envy. Sophia had been his executive assistant for 3 years. To the world, she was the woman behind the scenes, quiet, efficient, invisible. But to herself, she was someone still learning to heal from a love that had once broken her spirit. She told herself tonight would be purely professional, escorting her boss, managing his schedule, making sure every handshake and photo happened on cue. Yet as the music swelled and Alexander turned toward her with that faint, unreadable smile, she felt her heart stutter. "You clean up well," he murmured, his deep voice cutting through the chatter around them. "You look like you own the place," Sophia smiled softly, trying to hide the sudden warmth in her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, the formality slipping automatically from her lips. "I just didn't want to embarrass your company tonight." He tilted his head, his blue eyes glinting beneath the chandelier light. "You never do." They moved together through the crowd, Alexander offering polite nods to investors and politicians, while Sophia provided quiet reminders, names, affiliations, anecdotes he might forget. It was their unspoken rhythm. His presence drew attention. Her competence kept everything smooth. But as they paused near the art auction display, Sophia's focus drifted. The room seemed to tilt slightly, her heartbeat quickening for reasons she couldn't name. Then she heard it, a laugh. A sound so familiar, it pierced straight through 3 years of carefully built composure. She turned, and there he was, Daniel Freeman, the man who once promised forever but left her for ambition wrapped in another woman's smile. He looked effortlessly charming as always, perfect suit, confident stance, that same smirk that used to melt her. Beside him stood a glamorous woman in a silver gown, Victoria Chen, an influencer known for posting her lavish life for the world to admire. Together they looked like a magazine cover, and for a fleeting second, Sophia forgot how to breathe. Her mind spun backward to the nights she'd cried alone, questioning what she lacked, why love had turned to condescension. Daniel had once said she was comfortable, that she lacked hunger, that she would never stand beside great men because she didn't think like them. She had believed him. Until she met Alexander, until she learned that quiet strength could move mountains too. Daniel noticed her then. His eyes locked on hers, surprise flickering before amusement settled across his face. He murmured something to Victoria and began walking toward them. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a champagne flute, pretending to sip while her pulse thundered in her ears. "Miss Martinez!" Alexander's voice was gentle but grounding. "Are you all right?" Before she could answer, Daniel was there, smiling as though their history were just a forgotten joke. "Sophia," he said, his tone smooth and dripping with mock affection. "What a surprise. You look different." His gaze lingered, critical and appraising all at once. "New dress? Trying out a new look for work?" Sophia forced a polite smile, praying her voice wouldn't shake. "Hello, Daniel. It's been a while." Victoria stepped forward, eyes bright with curiosity. "Oh, so you're that Sophia," she said, her laugh too sweet to be kind. "Daniel mentioned you once or twice. You worked at some office, right? How quaint. The word sliced like paper cuts, small but painful. Sophia's throat tightened, and for an instant she felt herself slipping back into the shadow of that old relationship, where she was never enough, where her dreams were always too small. But then she felt it, a steady, reassuring touch at her back. Alexander's hand. Firm, protective, unmistakably possessive. He stepped closer, his presence radiating calm authority. "Sorry to interrupt," he said smoothly, addressing Daniel with a polite but unmistakably dominant tone. "I didn't realize you knew my girlfriend," Sophia froze. Girlfriend? The word echoed in her mind like a thunderclap. She turned to look at him wide-eyed, but his gaze remained on Daniel, cool, confident, unwavering. He slid his arm around her waist as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Alexander Blackwood," he said, extending a hand. "Sophia's boyfriend." Daniel blinked, the smile faltering for the first time. "You're Alexander Blackwood?" he repeated, disbelief dripping from his voice. Even Victoria looked momentarily starstruck. Everyone in the room knew that name, the billionaire founder of Blackwood Innovations, the man who had turned an idea in his garage into one of the most influential tech empires in the country. "That's right," Alexander said easily, shaking Daniel's hand. "Sophia's told me so much about you." His tone was polite, but the faint edge beneath the civility could cut glass. Sophia tried to keep her expression steady, though inside her mind was chaos. Why was he doing this? To protect her? To save her from humiliation? Whatever the reason, she found herself grateful. Because for once, Daniel Freeman was speechless. "You two, you're dating?" Daniel asked, still struggling to recover his smug composure. "For almost a year now," Alexander replied without missing a beat. "She's been my anchor, honestly. Her brilliance is one of the reasons our latest expansion succeeded." He glanced at Sophia with a look so tender that her breath caught. "I'm the lucky one." The words fell between them like a spell. Sophia felt her knees weaken, not from the lie, but from how convincing it sounded, and how much a part of her wished it were true. Victoria gave a brittle laugh. "Well, that's impressive," she said, forcing charm into her voice. "You've certainly upgraded." "Funny," Alexander replied softly. "I was thinking the same thing." Sophia bit her lip to hide her smile. For the first time in years, she felt free from Daniel's shadow. The tables had turned, and the satisfaction was almost intoxicating. Daniel looked uncomfortable, his jaw tightening as he adjusted his cufflinks. "So," he said finally, "still working as an assistant?" "Director of Strategic Development," Alexander answered before Sophia could speak. "She earned it last month." "She's not just talented, she's extraordinary," Sophia blinked, startled. The promotion wasn't real, but the pride in his voice made her believe it could be someday. She looked at him, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the warmth in his eyes. Daniel's forced smile barely held. "Well, congratulations," he muttered. "Seems you're doing better than I thought." "She always was," Alexander said calmly, sliding his thumb along Sophia's waist, a gesture both protective and intimate. "Perhaps you just never noticed." Silence stretched between the four of them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Victoria tugged at Daniel's arm. "Come on, darling," she said with a too-bright laugh. "Let's check the auction table." When they walked away, Sophia released the breath she'd been holding. The orchestra swelled again, filling the space that had been thick with tension. She turned toward Alexander, intending to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. His hand was still resting at her back, and when he looked at her, something unspoken passed between them, something that made her heart race faster than it should have. "Thank you," she whispered finally. "You didn't have to do that," he smiled faintly. "You didn't deserve to be humiliated. Besides," he added, his tone softer now, "I've wanted to put that man in his place since the day I saw how nervous you looked reading his name on the guest list." Sophia blinked. "You knew?" "I pay attention," he said simply. "Especially to people who matter to me." The air between them shifted, gentle but charged. Sophia's breath hitched, her mind scrambling for words that wouldn't come. She wasn't used to being someone who mattered, Just then, the host's voice echoed across the ballroom, announcing the opening of the auction. People began moving toward the stage, laughter resuming, glasses clinking again. But Sophia barely heard any of it. She was still standing there, her pulse wild, her thoughts spinning. And then, before she could gather them, Alexander leaned closer, so close she could feel the whisper of his breath against her ear. "Let's make it believable," he murmured, his tone teasing yet laced with something deeper. Her brows furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. Believable? He met her eyes for a fraction of a second, and then, before she could process what was happening, his lips brushed hers. It was supposed to be a show, just a small, polite kiss to keep up appearances, but the instant they touched, everything else vanished. The music faded, the crowd blurred, and Sophia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. His lips were warm, confident, unhurried, and his hand at her waist pulled her closer as though he'd forgotten they were acting. She felt herself melt into him, her fingers curling against the smooth fabric of his suit jacket. It was electricity and comfort all at once, a kiss that felt like a promise and a question. When he finally drew back, his eyes searched hers, and for the first time, Alexander Blackwood looked uncertain. Sophia couldn't speak. Her thoughts tangled in a storm of disbelief and desire, her heart pounding so loudly she could hardly hear the applause beginning around them as the auction officially started. He straightened, offering his arm as if nothing had happened, though his voice was rougher now when he said, "Shall we?" She nodded, still dazed. As they walked toward the front tables, whispers trailed behind them, admiring, envious, curious. Somewhere in the distance, Daniel and Victoria were watching, their perfect smiles cracking at the edges. But Sophia no longer cared. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, valued, chosen, and yet, beneath the glittering surface, a new question bloomed in her chest, one that would change everything. Had that kiss been just a performance? Or had Alexander Blackwood meant every second of it? The morning after the kiss. The sun rose gently over the city, spilling molten gold across the glass towers and quiet harbor. From the penthouse windows of the Blackwood Tower, the world below looked small, almost delicate, a painting of movement and light. Inside the luxurious apartment, silence filled the air except for the soft hum of the espresso machine in the corner. Sophia Martinez stood at the kitchen counter, fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it again. The warmth of Alexander's lips, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her palm, the way the room had disappeared when he kissed her. She told herself it had been for show, a simple act to protect her dignity in front of her ex. But her body refused to believe the lie. That kiss had awakened something that neither of them could easily name. She had come to the penthouse early that morning to drop off the presentation files Alexander had requested the night before. It was supposed to be quick and professional, yet when the elevator doors opened to the top floor and the familiar scent of his home, that faint mix of cedarwood and coffee, surrounded her, her chest tightened. Every memory from last night came rushing back like a tide she couldn't fight. Her reflection in the glass startled her. She looked softer, different somehow. The woman staring back wasn't the quiet assistant content to stand behind others. She was the woman who had stood beside a billionaire, matched his gaze, and for one impossible moment felt like she belonged there. The soft sound of footsteps drew her from her thoughts. Alexander appeared in the doorway, his dark hair slightly tousled, his white shirt open at the collar. Gone was the armor of the tuxedo, replaced by a relaxed charm that made him seem almost human. He looked tired but composed, holding a mug of black coffee in one hand, his eyes calm yet carrying something unspoken. "Sophia," he said, his voice low and familiar in the quiet morning. "You're here early," she straightened immediately, flustered. "I wanted to drop off the client brief before the 9 o'clock meeting." "I didn't mean to disturb—" "You're not disturbing anything," he interrupted gently, setting his mug down on the marble counter. "I was just reviewing the auction results." Sophia nodded, her gaze drifting to the skyline behind him. "Last night was eventful," He gave a small laugh, the kind that softened the edges of his usually serious demeanor. That's one word for it. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy with meaning. Sophia could feel the weight of the unspoken pressing on her chest. The kiss, the pretend relationship, the way her heart hadn't stopped racing since. She wanted to ask what it had meant. She wanted to know if it had been real, even for a second. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled with fear. Alexander leaned against the counter, studying her with quiet intensity. "I should apologize," he said finally. "I didn't plan that. Performance." Her heart sank a little, though she tried not to show it. "You don't need to apologize. You were helping me." "Daniel!" "Daniel was out of line," Alexander said sharply, his blue eyes darkening. "He had no right to speak to you like that," Sophia swallowed, still pretending to be your girlfriend. And the kiss. She trailed off, her cheeks flushing at the memory. Alexander's expression softened. "The kiss," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. For a moment he seemed lost in thought. Then he exhaled slowly and met her gaze. "If it made you uncomfortable, I'm sorry. I just wanted him to understand that you're not someone to belittle. You deserve respect, more than he ever gave you." Sophia's throat tightened, emotion threatening to spill over. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No one's ever defended me like that before." He smiled faintly, almost wistfully. "Then that's everyone else's mistake." They stood there for a long moment, caught in the quiet gravity of each other's presence. The morning light streamed through the windows, painting his face in gold and shadow. Sophia found herself noticing the smallest details. The faint lines of fatigue near his eyes, the way his jaw flexed when he was thinking, the calm steadiness that always surrounded him. For 3 years, she had admired him from a respectful distance. But now, that distance felt impossible to maintain. To break the tension, she turned toward the table and began arranging the documents she had brought. "You'll need to review the client strategy outline before the board meeting," she said, trying to sound professional. "I highlighted the sections on potential market risks." Alexander moved closer, his scent, clean and masculine, wrapping around her like a quiet storm. "You really never stop working, do you?" She gave a small laugh. "It's easier than thinking sometimes." He tilted his head slightly. "And what are you trying not to think about?" Sophia froze, realizing too late that she had walked straight into his question. Her mind raced for an answer, any answer. But before she could find one, the elevator chimed. A soft, merciful sound that broke the spell. A moment later, Evelyn, Alexander's longtime housekeeper, entered the penthouse carrying a tablet. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. The PR team just sent over photos from last night's gala." "They've gone viral." "Viral?" Sophia echoed in alarm. Evelyn nodded with a knowing smile. "The internet loves a love story. Everyone's talking about the mysterious woman who stole Alexander Blackwood's heart." Sophia's mouth fell open. "Oh no," Alexander sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Of course." Within seconds, Evelyn pulled up a photo on the tablet and handed it to him. It was from last night, the moment of the kiss. The angle, the lighting, the emotion in their faces. It looked like something out of a movie. There was no trace of pretense, just raw, undeniable connection. Sophia felt her pulse quicken. "This could ruin your reputation," she said anxiously. "People will think that I'm in love," he said quietly, glancing at her. "I can live with that." Her breath caught. There was no teasing in his tone, no trace of humor. Just calm acceptance, like the idea didn't scare him at all. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. The PR team called, the board demanded explanations, and social media continued to spiral into speculation. Reporters camped outside the Blackwood Tower. By noon, the world had decided that Sophia Martinez was the billionaire's secret girlfriend, the woman who had managed to win the heart of the city's most unattainable man. Alexander handled it with his usual grace, instructing his media director to say nothing. "Silence," he said when asked what their official statement would be. "Let them believe what they want. Sometimes the truth isn't worth explaining." Sophia, on the other hand, was in turmoil. Her phone buzzed with messages, co-workers asking for gossip, friends sending screenshots, even her mother calling in disbelief. She wanted to hide, to disappear until the storm passed. But Alexander remained calm through it all, guiding her with quiet steadiness. At one point, as they walked through the office, he leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to be afraid of what people think, Sophia. Let them talk. Let them see a woman who didn't bow her head to mockery." She looked up at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he said softly. "But sometimes pretending to be brave is the only way to actually become brave." Those words stayed with her long after the day ended. That night, alone in her small apartment, Sophia sat by the window watching the city lights blur into the dark. Her phone kept buzzing, but she ignored it. Instead, she thought about Alexander, about how he had stood by her without hesitation, how he had seen strength in her that even she doubted existed. For years, Daniel had convinced her that she was small, ordinary, replaceable. But Alexander had looked at her as if she were something rare, something worth protecting, even at the cost of his own reputation. And for the first time in her life, Sophia began to believe that maybe she wasn't just surviving. Maybe she was growing into someone new. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether Alexander's gesture would fade into another headline, or whether that kiss would become a secret neither of them could forget. But one thing was certain. She wasn't the same woman who had once cried over a man who never saw her worth. She was stronger now, wiser, and somewhere, beneath the confusion and fear, a quiet ember of hope began to burn. Because sometimes, the moments we least expect, the mistakes, the impulsive decisions, the kisses meant for show, become the very moments that change everything, and Sophia had a feeling this was only the beginning. When pretend becomes real. Next morning began with the smell of rain and headlines. Newspapers, television anchors, and social media feeds were all echoing one name, Alexander Blackwood, and beside him, a woman who was suddenly the center of every curious gaze. Sophia Martinez, the mystery girlfriend. The story had become bigger than either of them expected. Photos of the kiss were everywhere, front pages, gossip blogs, business columns. Some articles called it the romance of the year. Others speculated she was a secret heiress or a PR stunt. But the truth, just two people caught in a moment of instinct, belonged to no one else but them. Sophia tried to stay calm as she scrolled through her phone, her heart pounding faster with every new notification. There were endless messages. Friends, colleagues, even strangers congratulating her as if her life had turned into a fairy tale overnight. Yet deep inside, she felt conflicted. The world saw glamour and romance, but she saw the danger of blurred lines. What if this destroyed her career? What if Alexander regretted helping her? At precisely 8 in the morning, her office door opened and Alexander stepped in. Even after all the chaos, he looked impossibly composed. Dark suit, pressed shirt, that calm authority that made people move out of his way. But his eyes softened when they met hers. "You're early again?" he said quietly. "So are you," she replied, setting her phone face down to stop the flood of notifications. He smiled faintly, then gestured to the couch by the window. "Let's talk before the board meeting." They sat across from each other, the city stretching endlessly behind the glass. For a moment, the only sound was the rain tapping gently against the windows. Then Alexander leaned forward, hands clasped. "The board is concerned," he began. "They're worried this media frenzy might distract investors." Sophia's stomach tightened. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood. I never meant to cause—" He held up a hand. "Stop. None of this is your fault." "You didn't do anything wrong." His tone was firm, protective. "If anything, I should be the one apologizing for putting you in this position." Her heart fluttered at the unexpected kindness. "Still," she murmured, "this situation, it's gotten out of control." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "The easiest way to end the rumors would be to confirm they're false. We could make a public statement." Sophia felt an ache of disappointment she didn't want to admit. "Yes, that makes sense. But," he continued, his voice lowering, It might also create unnecessary attention. Denials invite questions. What if we let it fade naturally? If people believe we're together, the story will lose novelty. Sophia blinked. You want to keep pretending? Alexander leaned back slightly, a half smile forming on his lips. Only if you're comfortable. Consider it damage control for both of us. Her mind swirled. Pretending meant more events, more photos, more proximity. But deep down, she wasn't afraid of the attention. She was afraid of how easily she might start believing the illusion. If you think it's best, she said finally, forcing composure into her voice. I do, he replied softly. And I trust you. That single sentence settled deep in her heart like a spark finding dry wood. The following weeks became a whirlwind. Everywhere they went, people whispered, smiled, speculated. Sophia learned to walk beside Alexander under the flash of cameras, to smile at reporters without flinching, to play the role the world demanded. Yet what began as performance slowly blurred into something real. Alexander changed too. He became more open, more present. Late-night calls about work turned into quiet conversations about dreams, fears, and childhood stories. Sophia discovered that beneath his calm exterior was a man who had built walls to survive, a man who carried loneliness even success couldn't erase. One evening, after a long investor dinner, they found themselves alone in his car. The city lights passed in slow rhythm through the tinted windows, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Sophia stared out at the blurred reflections and said quietly, It's strange. Everyone sees us and believes this perfect story, but none of it's real. Alexander glanced at her, his eyes thoughtful. Does it have to be unreal? She turned to face him. What do you mean? He hesitated, then said in a voice low enough to make her heartbeat stumble. Sometimes people pretend so long they forget where the act ends. Sometimes they find the truth hiding inside the lie. Her breath caught. Alexander, but before she could finish, the car stopped outside her building. He opened the door for her, his usual calm returning like a mask. Good night, Sophia, he said gently. She stepped out into the cool night air, her thoughts tangled, her heart aching with questions she didn't dare ask. The next morning, as Sophia walked into the office, the whispers began again, but this time not from strangers. Daniel Freeman was standing by the reception desk holding a bouquet of white lilies. His smile was careful, almost rehearsed. Sophia, he greeted, stepping closer. You look incredible. You've changed. She froze, shock and unease flooding her chest. Daniel, what are you doing here? I came to talk, he said, lowering his voice. Can we grab a coffee? There's nothing to talk about, she said firmly, moving to walk past him. He reached out, catching her wrist. Please just hear me out. I made mistakes, I know that. But seeing you with him, it made me realize what I lost. Sophia pulled her hand free, her voice steady but cold. You didn't lose me, Daniel. You let me go when you decided I wasn't enough. He winced. I was stupid. I thought ambition meant being ruthless. I thought you held me back. But the truth is, you were the only one who believed in me. His words, once capable of undoing her, now sounded hollow. She looked at him and saw not the man she had loved, but the lesson she had learned. You're right, she said softly. I did believe in you, but I finally learned to believe in myself too. She walked past him, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving him standing speechless in the lobby. That evening, Alexander called her into his office. I heard Daniel was here, he said, concern flickering in his gaze. He was, she replied simply. He wanted another chance. And what did you tell him? That he missed it, she said with quiet finality. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander smiled faintly, pride shining in his eyes. Good, Sophia's chest tightened. The tension between them was no longer something she could ignore. It hung in the air like static before a storm, charged, undeniable. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You know, this act we're putting on, it's becoming harder to remember it's an act. Her pulse quickened. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? He asked, his tone steady but his eyes vulnerable. Because it's unprofessional? Because it's dangerous? Or because you feel the same and you're afraid to admit it? Sophia's breath hitched. The world seemed to narrow until there was only him, his nearness, his voice, the warmth radiating from his body. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice trembling. He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to answer," he said softly. "Not yet." Then he stepped back, his control returning like a practiced shield. "Go home, Sophia. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." But that night neither of them slept, because sometimes the heart refuses to wait for logic to catch up, and both of them, two people from different worlds bound by a lie, were beginning to realize that what started as pretend was turning into something far too real to ignore. The storm between them. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, interviews, and carefully staged appearances that blurred the line between performance and something achingly intimate. Whenever Sophia Martinez and Alexander Blackwood entered a room together, conversations fell silent, eyes turned, and cameras flashed. What had begun as a shield to protect her dignity had evolved into a public love story that no one could stop talking about. Yet behind the polished smiles and orchestrated gestures, emotions ran deeper than either of them dared admit. Sophia tried to keep her heart steady, telling herself it was all an illusion, another task, another part of her job. But the illusion was too perfect, too alive. She could feel it in the quiet moments. When Alexander brushed his hand against hers as they shared notes before a meeting, when his gaze lingered too long after laughter faded, when his voice softened only for her. The tension between them pulsed like electricity, both thrilling and terrifying. The storm finally began the evening of the investors' conference. It was one of those nights when the city looked impossibly bright from the rooftop terrace of the Blackwood Hotel. The event was a celebration of the company's latest partnership, and the world's eyes were once again on Alexander. Sophia had spent all week preparing for it, drafting speeches, reviewing data, ensuring everything was flawless. But even as she stood beside him beneath the soft glow of lanterns, she felt uneasy. Daniel Freeman was there. He had returned, not as the man who once broke her heart, but as the representative of a potential investor firm. His charm was polished, his confidence restored, and his intentions dangerously clear. The moment he saw Sophia, his eyes lit up with the spark of old ownership, a silent challenge that made her stomach twist. Throughout the evening, Daniel lingered, hovering near conversations, forcing proximity, pretending professionalism while slipping in memories meant to unsettle her. And though Sophia ignored him with practiced grace, she could feel Alexander watching, his composure slowly cracking. When the speeches ended and guests began to mingle, Daniel approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "Two old friends," he said smoothly, offering one to Sophia. "I don't drink with people who taught me to doubt myself," she replied quietly, her tone even but firm. He smirked. "Still sharp, I see." "But come on, Sophia. We both know this thing with Alexander isn't real." "You think men like him fall for their assistance?" "Your temporary comfort, that's all. He'll move on to someone from his world soon enough." Her pulse pounded in her ears, anger and hurt mixing in equal measure. But before she could respond, Alexander's voice came from behind them, low, controlled, and filled with steel. "Is there a problem here?" Daniel turned, smirking. "Just a conversation between old acquaintances." "Funny," Alexander said. Stepping closer, it didn't sound like one. His gaze was sharp, the warmth gone, replaced by something protective and primal. Sophia touched his arm gently. "It's fine, Alexander. He was just leaving." But Daniel wasn't finished. "Careful, Sophia," he said with a cruel edge. "When this fairy tale collapses, you'll realize people like him don't rescue girls like you. They replace them." The air around them seemed to freeze. Then Alexander moved, slow but deliberate, closing the distance until his voice was a whisper, meant only for Daniel. "You're right," he said, his words calm but deadly. "I don't rescue her. She doesn't need rescuing. But I'd burn down my empire before I let you insult her again." Daniel's smirk faltered. For the first time, he looked uncertain. He muttered something and walked away, leaving the three of them standing in the cold silence of his absence. Sophia exhaled, shaking slightly. "You didn't have to do that." Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I did." They stood there for a long moment beneath the soft glow of the terrace lights, the city humming below them. Then he took a slow breath. "Sophia, I can't keep pretending." Not with him around. Not with the way this has become. Something else. Her chest tightened. "Alexander, please, don't say things you'll regret." "I won't regret the truth," he said quietly. "I've tried to stay professional. I've told myself it's an illusion, a line we shouldn't cross. But every time you walk into a room, I lose that battle." Sophia's heart pounded painfully. She wanted to run, to escape the weight of what he was saying, but his words rooted her in place. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "You're just angry. You're protective because of what Daniel said." He stepped closer, his eyes burning with something she had never seen before. "Protective, yes. Angry, yes. But it's more than that, Sophia. You matter to me. Not as my assistant, not as part of some story the media invented. You've become the one person I can't stop thinking about." Her breath trembled. "And if this ruins everything? Your reputation, your company?" He shook his head. "Let it. None of that means anything if I can't be honest with myself." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she said softly, "I don't know how to handle this. I don't even know what's real anymore." He smiled sadly. "Then let me show you." Before she could respond, his hands cupped her face, gentle but sure, and his lips found hers once more. But this kiss wasn't about protection or performance. It was raw, unguarded, full of every emotion they had both tried to deny. The noise of the party faded, the lights blurred, and all that existed was the rush of their hearts colliding. When they finally parted, Sophia's eyes were glassy with confusion and longing. "We can't do this," she whispered. Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "We already have." That night, she returned home shaken, her thoughts a storm of emotion. Her reflection in the mirror looked the same, but she knew something inside her had irrevocably changed. The line between truth and illusion was gone. Days later, the consequences came crashing down. The tabloids ran new headlines. Alexander Blackwood's secret romance confirmed. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment. Her privacy vanished. The company's PR department panicked. Investors questioned leadership stability, and whispers of scandal filled the corridors. Sophia wanted to disappear, to take the blame so Alexander could be free of the fallout. She even drafted a resignation letter. But before she could send it, his message arrived. "Come to the penthouse. We need to talk." When she arrived, he was standing by the window, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he no longer wanted. "They're demanding damage control," he said. "They want me to issue a statement, deny everything." She nodded slowly. "You should. It'll protect you." He turned, eyes fierce. "No, I won't lie. Not about this. Not about you." Her throat closed. "Alexander," he stepped closer. "You told me once that believing in yourself was harder than believing in anyone else. Let me show you what that looks like." And before she could stop him, he sent a message to the entire executive board, his publicist, and the media department. No denials. "Sophia Martinez is not a rumor. She's the woman I love. That's the truth." The message spread within minutes, lighting the world on fire. Sophia stared at him in disbelief, tears welling in her eyes. "You just risked everything," she whispered. He smiled gently. "Maybe. But for once, it feels like I gained something worth the risk." In that moment, standing against the backdrop of the city lights and chaos, Sophia realized that love wasn't always soft. Sometimes it arrived like a storm, loud, disruptive, terrifying, but it cleared the skies in its own way. She took a deep breath, then stepped toward him. "Then I guess I'll stand beside you in the rain," she said quietly. And as his hand found hers, the storm outside the glass finally broke, rain cascading down in silver streaks, washing away the last traces of doubt. The aftermath and the promise. The storm outside had ended, but another one was just beginning to calm inside Sofia Martinez's heart. The confession Alexander had sent to the world, the message that shattered headlines, melted social media feeds, and redefined his image overnight, still echoed in her mind like thunder that refused to fade. Sofia Martinez is not a rumor. She's the woman I love. No one had ever said her name like that before. Not in front of the world, not with that kind of certainty. The days that followed were a whirlwind of chaos and disbelief. The media swarmed both of them, reporters waiting outside buildings, flashbulbs exploding whenever she stepped out of a car, microphones pushed into her face asking how an ordinary woman had captured the heart of one of the most powerful men in the city. Sofia tried to keep her composure, but every morning felt like walking through fire. The company's PR team begged Alexander to retract his statement, investors threatened to pull out, and analysts predicted a fall in stock value. Yet through it all, Alexander stood firm. In one particularly tense board meeting, the room filled with older men in expensive suits and polite disapproval, Alexander leaned back in his chair, eyes cool and unyielding. "If my personal life determines your faith in this company," he said, his tone sharp as glass, "then perhaps you never believed in our work to begin with." No one dared to speak after that. When the meeting ended, Sofia waited outside, uncertain whether to feel pride or guilt. The elevator doors opened, and Alexander stepped out, his expression softening when he saw her. "You don't have to stand in the shadows anymore," he said quietly. "If this costs me everything, then at least I'll lose it telling the truth." Tears stung her eyes. "I never wanted you to risk it all for me." He smiled faintly, brushing his thumb along her cheek. "Maybe I didn't do it for you. Maybe I did it because you made me remember what it means to feel human again." Those words settled deep inside her. Healing wounds she hadn't realized were still bleeding. That night, they met on the rooftop of the Blackwood Tower, the city lights stretching endlessly below. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and jasmine from the garden planters. Sofia stood by the railing, the wind teasing her hair as she watched the skyline pulse with life. When Alexander joined her, he didn't speak at first. He simply stood beside her, hands in his pockets, the quiet between them rich and full. "Do you ever think about what happens after?" she asked softly. "After what? After all this? The noise, the rumors, the spotlight." He looked at her then, his gaze steady. "After that comes the truth. And truth always survives noise." She smiled faintly. "You sound sure." "I am," he said simply. "Because for the first time in years, I'm not living for shareholders or headlines. I'm living for something real." Sofia turned toward him fully. "You've built empires, Alexander. You've faced people who wanted to destroy you. But love doesn't always follow reason." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Neither do I." She laughed softly, a sound caught between disbelief and affection. "You know this could still ruin you, right? Then let it ruin me beautifully." The simplicity of his words left her breathless. They stayed there until the city fell quiet, until the stars broke through the thinning clouds. And as the wind danced around them, Alexander reached for her hand, not as a performance, not for the cameras, but as a man reaching for the one thing that finally felt right. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Sofia, I know our story began with a lie, but every moment since has been the truest part of my life." She met his gaze, her heart trembling under the weight of everything they'd endured. "When I met you," she whispered, "I was just trying to survive. You showed me what it means to live." He smiled, that rare, unguarded smile she had learned to love. "Then let's live. No pretenses, no fear. Just us." Sofia's eyes shimmered as tears slipped free, not from sadness, but from a peace she hadn't known before. For years, she'd been told she wasn't enough, that love belonged to those who looked, earned, or spoke a certain way. But standing here, hand in hand with the man who had seen her for who she was, she finally understood. Love didn't ask permission. It simply arrived, unapologetically and without warning. Weeks passed, and the world eventually moved on. The story that once dominated headlines faded into the next trending headline, and slowly, people began to see beyond the spectacle. The company recovered, the investors returned, and the whispers turned into quiet admiration. But for Sophia, everything had changed. She no longer lived in fear of being less than. She had faced judgment and walked through fire and found herself stronger on the other side. She'd earned her promotion on merit, not rumor. And now, when she walked into meetings, people saw not the woman who dated Alexander Blackwood, but the strategist who redefined the company's direction. Her name had become her own again. Alexander often teased that she was now busier than he was. "You're becoming a legend, Sophia," he'd say with a grin, pouring her coffee during their morning routine. "And whose fault is that?" She'd reply, smiling into her cup. In truth, their relationship had found its rhythm, not in grand gestures or lavish parties, but in quiet moments. Shared breakfast before sunrise, laughter over burnt toast, silence that didn't need filling. One evening, months later, Alexander took her back to the ballroom where it had all begun, the charity gala that had started everything. The chandeliers glowed just as they had that night, though now the room was empty except for the two of them. Sophia looked around, memories flooding back, the dress, the nerves the moment she'd seen Daniel, the kiss that changed her life. "Why bring me here?" she asked softly. Alexander smiled, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Because sometimes," he said, his voice trembling just slightly, "the best stories deserve a proper ending." Her breath caught as he opened the box. Inside was a simple diamond ring, elegant, timeless, and shining faintly under the golden light. He took her hand. "You once told me you believed love wasn't meant for people like you," he said quietly. "But you were wrong. Love was waiting for you to believe in yourself first." Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Alexander." "Marry me, Sophia," he said, his voice steady now. "Not because the world expects it, not because it would look perfect in the papers, but because I can't imagine a single day of my life without the woman who taught me how to feel again." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The weight of every struggle, every heartbreak, every doubt melted away, leaving only truth. Then she smiled through her tears. "You already had my heart the moment you pretended to be my boyfriend." He laughed softly, pulling her close. "Then let's make that pretend forever." When she whispered yes, the empty ballroom filled with an invisible audience, the echoes of everything they had endured, the ghosts of who they used to be, and the promise of everything that lay ahead. Months later, their wedding was small, private, and far from the cameras. Sophia's parents cried quietly in the front row, and Alexander looked at her like a man seeing light for the first time. And when they shared their vows beneath the same city skyline that had once tested them, the rain began to fall softly, a reminder of the night the storm had begun, and the night it finally brought them home, because love, at its truest, wasn't a fairy tale born of perfection. It was a storm that tested, a fire that forged, and a promise that endured. And for Sophia and Alexander, what began as a lie had become the most beautiful truth of all.